You know this feeling, right? It's all too familiar. One day, your partner is just completely present. They're warm, affectionate, and you're thinking, okay, finally, we're back on track. But then, out of absolutely nowhere, they go cold, distant, dismissive, and you're left scrambling, replaying every single conversation in your head. Just when that pain gets literally unbearable, boom, they come back, loving again. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the biological and psychological science behind hot and cold love. And I promise you, what's actually happening beneath the surface here is going to blow your mind. So why is this hot and cold dynamic just so wildly addictive? If you've been there, you've definitely asked yourself this. You've probably even blamed yourself, right? Thinking, oh, I just lack willpower, or maybe I'm just addicted to the drama. Well, guess what? The science tells a completely different story. You're not weak, you are actually caught in a highly efficient biological trap. Because here is the hard truth. What you're experiencing isn't actually love. It's something called intermittent reinforcement. And look, I want this to completely shatter the idea that you're just going through some sort of personal emotional failure. You're not. This is a cold, hard biological reality. It's literally one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms known to behavioral science, and it works on human brains with absolutely terrifying efficiency. Okay, let's unpack this. To really get what's going on, we have to travel back to the 1950s and look at the work of B.F. Skinner. He's kind of the father of operant conditioning. Skinner discovered something incredibly counterintuitive in his Harvard lab. He found that if you reward a subject's behavior every single time, sure, they learn it fast, but they also give it up super quickly the second that reward stops. But, and here's the kicker, if you reward that exact same behavior randomly, say, sometimes after 2 tries, sometimes after 50, the subject becomes completely obsessed. They will frantically keep performing that behavior long after the reward is actually gone. Think about it like a casino. If you were playing a slot machine and it reliably paid out on exactly every 10th pull, you'd play pretty casually, right? If it never paid out, you'd just walk away. But because it pays out unpredictably, your brain gets locked into this state of perpetual anticipation. It's the slot machine effect. Now take that slot machine and replace it with your partner. Replace the casino payout with their affection and warmth. That unpredictable payout is exactly what's creating this endless obsessive anticipation in your relationship. All right, let's look at section 1, your brain on unpredictability. To really understand this trap, we got to look under the hood at your neurochemistry. And it turns out we have dopamine all wrong. People always call it the pleasure chemical, right? But it's actually the anticipation chemical. It doesn't spike when you finally get a reward. It spikes when you expect you might get it. In a stable, predictable relationship, your brain knows what your partner is going to do, so you feel calm. But in a hot and cold dynamic, your brain can't predict a single thing, which basically sends your dopamine system into absolute overdrive. And guys, the severity of this neurological dependence, it literally cannot be overstated. As the research notes, your brain is processing your partner's intermittent warmth the exact same way it would process a hit of cocaine. Seriously, brain imaging studies show that the neural circuits lighting up during unpredictable social rewards overlap heavily with the circuits for gambling and substance abuse. That emotional high you feel when you finally reconnect after a cold spell, chemically speaking, that's practically identical to a gambling addict hitting the jackpot. Moving into our next section, the biology of attachment and the survival response. So as humans, we are fundamentally wired to depend on our partners for co-regulation and emotional safety. It's just how we're built. This means a hot and cold dynamic directly threatens our innate biological programming. Your limbic system, that's the threat processing center of your brain, it honestly can't tell the difference between my partner is ignoring me and I am actively being chased by a predator. During the withdrawal phase, you get this massive spike in cortisol and adrenaline. You are literally thrown into fight or flight mode. So when that warmth finally returns, that relief doesn't just feel nice. It feels like survival. It feels like you were drowning and someone finally pulled you up for air. When you repeat that over and over, this threat response mixed with dopamine creates a shockingly deep trauma bond, which brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, the waltz of pain and co creating cycles. You see, intermittent reinforcement is rarely a one person show. It's almost always this destructive cycle co created by two people who are really just doing what makes sense for their own survival. Let's look at the dancers in this waltz. On one side, we have the relentless lover. This person usually has an anxious attachment style. To them, any distance is a massive threat. So they pursue, they reach out, they protest. On the other side is the reluctant lover, who usually leans toward an avoidant attachment style. They experience all that pursuit as overwhelming pressure, so they retreat and shut down to manage their anxiety. So the pursuit triggers the withdrawal, and then that deeper withdrawal triggers an even harder pursuit. It is just an endless, exhausting feedback loop. If you're sitting there wondering, wait, am I stuck in this loop right now? Well, there are a few key clinical signs to look out for. First, the highs feel disproportionately euphoric, literally like a drug. Second, you find yourself hypervigilant, right? Analyzing every single text, every tiny shift in body language. Third, you feel the most in love right after a massive conflict. And fascinatingly, if you actually do manage to get into a stable, healthy relationship later on, it might feel incredibly boring or even suspicious to you. But don't panic. That is just the after effect of a totally recalibrated reward system. Oh, and not to mention, this chronic stress takes a huge physical toll. It can lead to deep physical exhaustion or even actual illness. So, this leads into a huge question, section 4, why we can't leave, or what I like to call the invisible trap. People outside the relationship will often look at all this drama and exhaustion and just say, well, why don't you just walk away? But as we're seeing, leaving isn't just some simple logical choice. There are very real, very heavy biological and psychological barriers here. First off, you've got the sunk cost problem. You've invested months or years for those rare, beautiful moments, and you don't want to lose that investment. Then you have the hope mechanism, because those warm periods, they are genuine. That makes them incredibly hard to dismiss. Third is the neurological dependency. Leaving means you have to endure literal physical withdrawal symptoms, anxiety, insomnia, obsessive thoughts, the whole shebang. And finally, there's the childhood echo. For a lot of folks, this kind of volatility actually mirrors their earliest caregivers. It's this deeply ingrained template of love that somewhat tragically just feels comfortably like home. But there is hope. Let's look at section 5, breaking the reinforcement cycle and rewiring your brain. Here is the thing, because your nervous system doesn't respond to logic, you absolutely cannot just think your way out of intermittent reinforcement. You have to actively create new experiences. So here's your action plan. Step 1, name the pattern out loud. Acknowledge it to break the spell. This moves it from being something that's just happening to you to something you can actually observe. Step 2, track the cycle on paper. When you literally see the mechanics written down in front of you, it becomes way harder to romanticize the behavior. Step 3, start building physical tolerance for calm, steady state connection. Fair warning, it's going to feel pretty flat at first, but you got to stick with it. And step 4, work with a professional to process that childhood template. Therapies like emotionally focused therapy or EFT are amazing for this. They help create that missing experience of consistent warmth you might have lacked as a kid, which actually builds brand new neural pathways. Ultimately, the big goal of this entire healing process is learning the fundamental difference between intensity and intimacy. Intermittent reinforcement, that just gives you the roller coaster of intensity. Sure, it's exciting and unpredictable, but it is entirely exhausting. Intimacy, on the other hand, is safe, it's quiet, it's known, and it is steady.
Intensity is just a biological surge of unpredictability, and it can absolutely never, ever substitute for real sustaining intimacy. Now, we need to cover something really important. Section 6, when unpredictability becomes abuse. Before we wrap up this explainer, there is a vital clinical caveat we have to talk about. We've spent a lot of time discussing how this dynamic is often a co created struggle based on attachment styles, but there is a much darker side to this. When unpredictability is deliberately weaponized, like when someone is consciously alternating between love bombing you and then cruelly withdrawing to control you, isolate you, or gaslight you, that is emotional abuse. Full stop. If this sounds like your reality, you are not in a co created cycle, and couples therapy is not the answer here. Safety planning is. Please, if you need help, reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. Get that individual support. Intermittent reinforcement is an incredibly powerful force. It literally rewires your brain and completely hijacks your sense of safety. But please remember this. Neural pathways can be rewired. You absolutely have the power to reclaim your nervous system, which leaves us with one final pretty profound question to think about. After all this time holding your breath, do you really want just another peak on that roller coaster, or are you finally ready for solid ground?
If you want to work on this for real, try Figlet, my AI relationship coaching app. You can start for free, no credit card needed, at figlet.empathy.com.